What would you do if your mom called your 3-day-old son a mistake? I've been through that. While everyone was sending me congratulations, my mom cruelly commented under the photo, "This child is a mistake. Why would my mom be so heartless? And what did I do to protect my family?" Before I get into the details of the story, let me say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for taking the time to follow this story. Hello everyone, I'm Brian, 35 years old, living with my wife and 3-year-old son in Austin, Texas. If you ask me what my life's like right now, I'd tell you my current life is really peaceful. That's something I had to sacrifice a great deal to achieve. Every morning when I wake up, the first thing I see is Anna's face, my wife, sleeping soundly next to me, and just a few minutes later, tiny footsteps running from the next room. Then our bedroom door bursts open. Alex, my son, will try to climb onto my bed. Sometimes I have to help him out. After he successfully climbs onto my bed, Alex will jump on me with the biggest grin. That's my favorite moment of the day. On weekends, we usually take Alex to visit my in-laws. Their small farm is about an hour's drive from Austin, situated in an area surrounded by endless wheat fields. My wife's parents are down-to-earth farmers who've spent their whole lives connected to the land. They love Alex like he's their entire world. Every time I watch my father-in-law take Alex to see the horse stables, or my mother-in-law teach the little guy how to make cookies in the kitchen, I get this warm feeling I can't even describe. For me, my current life revolves around my wife and son. And to have this peace, I had to firmly cut ties with my biological parents and my brother's family, just 3 days after my son was born. Many people might think I'm cruel. Many people might think that, regardless of how wrong parents are, kids shouldn't sever family ties. But there are wounds too deep, words too poisonous, where forgiveness means destroying yourself. And the story I'm telling you today is exactly why I made that decision. This story happened in August 2022, when my son was only 3 days old. It was a typical morning at the hospital. Anna had just finished breastfeeding and was taking a rest. I sat next to the bed, watching my tiny son sleeping peacefully in his crib. In that moment of happiness, I decided to take a photo and post it on social media to share the joy with friends and family. The photo of Alex sleeping, his tiny hands clenched tight like he was holding on to the whole world. I wrote a simple caption, "Welcome, Alex, to the world. You're the most wonderful thing to Mom and Dad." Within just a few minutes, the post got dozens of likes and comments. Friends sent congratulations. Coworkers shared their joy. Neighbors promised to visit when we got home. Everything was warm and full of love. But then, that joy quickly vanished when I read my mom's comment. Just one short line, but powerful enough to destroy everything like a bomb. Under Alex's photo, my mom had written, "This child is a mistake." The moment I read those words, I felt like someone had just poured ice water over my head. I read it over and over again, trying to convince myself I was seeing things wrong. But no, that was definitely my mom's account. Those were definitely the words she had written. Anna noticed the change in my face immediately. Having just given birth, still weak, she still managed to ask me with a worried voice, "Brian, what's wrong?" At that moment, I didn't know how to answer. After a few seconds of hesitation, I responded to my wife in the calmest voice I could manage. "Nothing, honey. I'm just a little tired." I tried to reassure my wife, but inside me was a storm. I thought about the entire 9 months Anna was pregnant. My parents never once asked how we were doing. Not one phone call. Not one text message. Not one visit. They lived only 40 minutes away from us, but acted like we were on another planet. Meanwhile, my wife's parents were completely different. Even though their farm was over 2 hours' drive from Austin, they still visited us every week. My mother-in-law brought nutritious meals she cooked for her daughter. My father-in-law fixed up the baby's room and installed additional furniture. They bought newborn clothes, toys, and all the necessary items for their soon-to-be-born grandchild. As soon as they knew Anna was going to the hospital to give birth, my in-laws drove 120 miles through the night to be there. They sat waiting for 12 hours outside the delivery room, anxious and worried. When Alex was born, they were the first to hold their grandchild, and I saw tears of happiness streaming down their faces. As for my parents, I had sent them a text announcing the pregnancy since the 3rd month. They just chose to ignore it. And now, when my son had been born for 3 days, The first thing my mom did was publicly comment that her grandson was a mistake. After sitting motionless for a few minutes staring at my mom's comment, I took a screenshot of it. My hands were shaking with anger. I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I needed answers. I needed to confront them. Thank goodness I took that screenshot because just a few minutes later, my mom's comment was deleted. Maybe someone had cursed at my mom, so she was forced to delete the comment. That day, my in-laws were also at the hospital. When I showed them the image containing my mom's comment, my father-in-law's face turned red with anger. My father-in-law gripped my shoulder tight and asked, "What are you gonna do?" I answered my father-in-law, "I'm going to their house. I need answers." My mother-in-law then came close to me, took my hand, and warned me in a serious voice, "You absolutely have to stay calm. No matter what, they're still your biological parents. Don't hit them. Don't give them any excuse to make trouble for you." Hearing their advice, I nodded and promised I'd control myself. Then I kissed Anna and Alex on the forehead and left the hospital. On the drive to my parents' house, memories flooded back into my head like a slow-motion film. I graduated with honors in finance from the University of Texas at Austin. At 25, I started my own company, specializing in safe financial solutions consulting for individuals. The business was doing well, and I was proud that I'd built my career with my own abilities. Even though I was successful through my own skills in my parents' eyes, I was always the failed son, especially when compared to Eric, my older brother. Eric is 3 years older than I am. He wasn't smart, had average grades, and his work abilities weren't anything special either. But he had one thing my parents valued extremely: he married Emily, the daughter of a wealthy family in the area. Eric's wife's family owned a big construction company. After getting married, Eric got a job at his wife's company as a manager. He didn't need to struggle, didn't need to work hard. He just had to sit there and enjoy the benefits of his wife's wealth. My parents were proud of it, as if it were their own achievement. Every family dinner, conversations always revolved around the car Eric was driving now, the house he lived in, and where he traveled to. As for me, even though I'd built my company from nothing, even though I had stable income and a solid career, I was still treated like I was invisible. The family relationship started to deteriorate seriously when I brought Anna to the family Christmas party and introduced her to everyone. My wife is beautiful, intelligent, and has a kind heart. She graduated with a degree in education and works as an elementary school teacher. She's not wealthy, but she has all the qualities I was looking for in a life partner. As soon as they found out Anna came from a farming family, with parents who grow wheat in the countryside, my parents' attitude changed completely. Throughout that party, my mom kept asking Anna sarcastic questions, such as, "How many acres does your family have? Or do you know how to tell different wines apart?" My dad completely ignored Anna, only talked to Emily, and constantly praised her family's status. I clearly remember the moment Anna looked down at her plate, trying to hide her hurt. Right then, I squeezed her hand under the table, like a silent promise that I'd protect her at any cost. After that party, my mom called me aside for a private talk and told me straight up in a cold voice, "I don't accept Anna. You need to break up with her." At that moment, I answered, "Mom," my voice firm, "I'm going to marry Anna. That's my decision." Seeing my determination, my mom looked at me like I just betrayed the entire family. She screamed at me, her voice full of contempt, "You're crazy. Their family is farmers. You'll embarrass our whole family." After what Mom said, I didn't argue. I silently turned around and walked away. From that night on, the relationship between my family and me became irreparably tense. My parents kept pressuring me, wanting me to marry the daughter of one of their close friends. That girl's family was very wealthy and owned a chain of hotels in the area. They told me that if I agreed, they'd help me expand my company, provide me with investment capital, and make me as wealthy as Eric. But I refused everything. On my and Anna's wedding day, even though I'd sent invitations, my parents and brother, nobody came. Not one congratulation, not one phone call. We had a simple wedding at Anna's parents' farm. Under the brilliant sunset, among the golden wheat fields, I held my wife's hand and promised to love her for the rest of my life. My in-laws cried with happiness. They hugged me and said, "From now on, you're our son." In that moment, I realized that family isn't people who share the same blood as me. Family is made up of people who are willing to love and accept me unconditionally. As for those who constantly criticized, put down, and looked down on me, they're just strangers who happen to share my bloodline. While I was still lost in images from the past, my parents' gate appeared before my eyes, pulling me back to reality. I parked on the side of the road and looked at the familiar house. I noticed Eric's car was parked in front of the porch. He was also inside my parents' house. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. My mother-in-law's words echoed in my head. Don't hit them. Don't give them any excuse to make trouble for you. I got out of the car and walked toward the gate. The gate wasn't locked. I pushed it open and walked in, crossed the front yard, and rang the doorbell. Mom opened the door. Her face showed brief surprise when she saw me, but quickly returned to her usual cold expression. She didn't say anything, just turned and walked inside. I followed Mom into the living room. Dad was sitting on the sofa, holding a glass of alcohol. Eric sat across from him. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking at each person. Heavy silence filled the room. Finally, I asked Mom directly, "Explain it to me. Why did you comment like that under my post?" My mom answered me in an indifferent voice. "I don't know what you're talking about." Right then, I pulled out my phone and showed Mom the screenshot. She looked at the screen for a few seconds, then looked up and answered in the same calm voice. "I didn't comment that." My dad then jumped in, his voice full of defensiveness for Mom. "What are you doing here? To accuse your mother?" Eric also chimed in, his voice full of lecturing. "Brian, you should calm down. Someone probably hacked Mom's account and left a comment. Mom would never do that." Hearing what Eric said, I looked at him and felt a wave of nausea. He knew exactly what kind of person Mom was. He knew precisely how Mom had treated Anna, but he still chose to defend Mom, because he was always the spoiled child, always took the side that benefited him. I took a deep breath and said to all of them, my voice slow but clear, "This comment was posted from Mom's account at 8 a.m. Nobody hacked the account. Mom deliberately wrote that, and I want to know why." My mom has completely changed her attitude now. She looked straight into my eyes, her voice full of rage. "Fine, I wrote it. So what?" That answer was like a bucket of ice water thrown straight in my face. I stood there, feeling my body go numb. My mom continued, her voice getting sharper and sharper. "Your son shouldn't have been born. You married some poor girl, gave birth to a child with inferior blood. He's a mistake." The moment I heard those words, I felt like the whole world around me was collapsing. Right then, I wanted to rush forward and beat the hell out of Mom. But then my mother-in-law's words rang in my ears. "Don't hit them." Trying to control my anger, I turned to look at Dad. He was still sitting quietly, sipping his drink like this had nothing to do with him. I looked at Eric. He was looking down at the floor, saying nothing. They didn't object to Mom. They agreed with what she said. After a while, Dad finally spoke up, his voice cold. "Brian, you should go home. You chose your path. Don't blame this family." I looked at the man who had raised me, and for the first time in my life I no longer felt any connection. My dad was a stranger. My mom was a stranger. My brother was also a stranger. They just happened to share the same blood as me, nothing more, nothing less. After thinking carefully, I looked straight into each person's eyes and said to them, my voice strangely calm, "All right, we're done. Don't beg me. It's too late." Then I turned around and walked out of that house without saying another word. Behind me, I heard Mom screaming after me, "You're gonna regret this. You'll come back crawling and begging us." Hearing those cruel words, I didn't turn around. I got in my car, closed the door, and drove away. When the car turned off that familiar road, I knew I'd never come back to this place as a son again. After leaving my parents' house, I didn't drive straight back to the hospital. Instead, I moved to my house. Before going back to see my newborn son, I needed to do something meaningful. I parked in front of my house and dashed into my office. From the filing cabinet, I pulled out a stack of papers I'd been keeping for years. I needed to use them. After getting the necessary documents, I drove to meet David, my friend from high school. David's now a lawyer specializing in family disputes, one of the best lawyers in the area. David welcomed me at his office. When he saw my tense expression, he immediately closed the office door and asked me with a worried voice, "What's wrong, Brian?" I put the file on the desk and answered, I need you to help me. David nodded and began reviewing the papers I had brought. The first document I gave to David was a notarized copy of my grandfather's will from 2015. After he died, he left a will in which my brother, Eric, was named as the beneficiary to inherit the house where my parents live. Half the value each. The truth is that the house doesn't belong to my parents. They're only allowed to live there because Grandpa let them, and because Eric and I never claimed our inheritance. The second document was a loan agreement from 2018 for $20,000. That year, my parents wanted to buy a new car but didn't have enough money. I lent them that money and planned to give it to them. That's why, over the years, I never brought up the money again. But now everything's changed. David looked through the documents and told me, legally, you have every right to claim your inheritance. And the $20,000 debt has all the proper paperwork. You can sue for it. Hearing what David said, I nodded and replied, I want you to proceed immediately. David was quiet for a moment, then looked at me and asked in a serious voice, Are you sure? If you do this, the family relationship will be completely broken. There's no going back. Instead of answering David's question, I took out my phone and showed David my mom's comment. I also told him what happened at my parents' house an hour ago. David looked at the photo and listened to what I told him. He looked at me with eyes full of rage and said, You showed good restraint. If that were my mom, she'd be in the hospital for at least 2 months. I laughed and asked David back, Is this how a lawyer handles things? David also laughed and answered, Lawyers have hearts too, and I know how to get my charges reduced if needed. After that answer, we both laughed, but the laughter was full of bitterness. David worked faster than I thought. Just 2 days later, when my son was discharged from the hospital, that's when David called to say he'd completed the paperwork and sent the legal documents to my parents' house. Just 2 hours after I got the call from David, my phone started ringing nonstop. Calls from Dad, calls from Mom, calls from Eric, messages flooding in, all with angry and threatening content. I blocked all those numbers and deleted all the messages without bothering to listen to or read anything. That same afternoon, around 3 p.m., when I just put Alex in his crib, the doorbell rang. I looked through the security camera and saw my parents and Eric standing at the door. They brought a big gift bag with a teddy bear printed on it. After a few seconds of hesitation, I decided to meet them. I opened the door and stood blocking the doorway, not inviting them in. My mom spoke first. She said to me, Brian, I came to apologize. I said those words in anger. Let me come into the house. Let me see my grandson's face. Right after Mom finished speaking, I looked at the woman standing in front of me. 2 days ago, she called my son a mistake and an inferior. Now she's standing here asking to see her grandson's face. The hypocrisy made me want to throw up. I answered, Mom, get lost. My mom's face immediately changed color. The submissive mask fell off, revealing the real person underneath. She pointed her finger at my face and screamed, How dare you? How dare you kick out your own mother? You're ungrateful. Right after that, my dad also rushed forward, his voice full of anger. How dare you demand the house back? How dare you demand the money back? That's our money. Seeing their anger, I laughed out loud. After finishing laughing, I looked straight into Dad's eyes and answered in an ice-cold voice. That's money I lent with proper paperwork. And the house is an inheritance Grandpa left for Eric and me. I'm just claiming back what belongs to me. Eric now pulled out his phone and started recording video. He was filming while roaring in a tone like he was acting. Everyone look, Brian's kicking his elderly parents out of the house. He's ungrateful. Seeing Eric point his phone at me, I didn't care about his circus act. I calmly pulled out my phone and called 911. When they saw me calling the police, they began to panic. My mom screamed even louder, toxic curses pouring out nonstop. In the middle of that chaos, the back door of the house suddenly burst open. My in-laws rushed out to the front yard. They were staying at my house after Anna and Alex came home. When they heard the noise and cursing, they could no longer sit still. My father-in-law is a tall farmer who's done hard work in the fields his whole life. He rushed to my dad, grabbed his collar, and threw him down on the grass in front of the yard. My mother-in-law wasn't having it either. She charged at my mom, grabbed my mom's hair, and dragged her across the yard. My mother-in-law was pulling while screaming. You dare call my grandson a mistake? I'll show you that you're the mistake for daring to set foot here. Seeing his parents being brutally treated by my in-laws, Eric tried to run in to stop them, but I quickly held him back. I didn't hit him, I just pushed him away and stood between him and my in-laws. Right then, Eric screamed in my face, his voice full of rage. You're letting your in-laws beat your biological parents? I looked straight into his eyes and shouted back, I don't have parents. Eric was stunned by my answer. He tried to rush in to rescue our parents but couldn't get through. The noise attracted the neighbors' attention. Several people ran out to their porches and looked over. A neighbor shouted over, asking me, Brian, what's going on? I answered the neighbor, they're trespassing on my house. I told them to leave, but they won't go. I called the police. Right after that, several more kind neighbors ran over to my house. They helped my in-laws restrain my parents. My mom was lying on the grass, hair disheveled, face red from anger and humiliation. She looked at me with eyes full of hatred and hissed, I'll never forgive you. You'll pay for this. I didn't answer back. I just stood there, blocking my front door to protect my wife and child inside. 20 minutes after the 911 call, the police car arrived and broke up the chaotic crowd. 2 police officers got out of the car and approached us. They asked everyone to stay calm and explain the situation. My dad immediately rushed to the officers and screamed, his voice full of outrage, Arrest him. Arrest this guy and his in-laws. They attacked us. My mom also chimed in, crying while yelling loudly, We're the victims. We just came to visit our grandson and got beaten up. The officer looked around, took in the scene, and then turned to ask me. I calmly explained everything. I showed the police the video from the security camera in front of the house, which recorded my parents and brother coming to cause trouble, trying to force their way into the house when I'd already asked them to leave. After watching the video, the officer turned to my parents and told them in a stern voice, You're illegally trespassing. The homeowner asked you to leave, but you refused to do so. He has every right to sue you. My dad opened his mouth to argue, but the officer raised his hand to stop him and continued, I advise you to leave right now. If not, I'll have to arrest you for illegal trespassing. Seeing how serious the police were, my mom looked at me one last time, her eyes full of resentment. Then they turned around and quietly got into Eric's car, leaving in shame. A few days after the incident, my parents and Eric spread a completely different story. They told everyone that I was an ungrateful son who kicked my elderly parents out of the house, letting my in-laws beat them up. Eric even shared the video he recorded that day, but edited it to only show my in-laws attacking, without the part before when my parents caused trouble and tried to force their way into the house. One afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I looked through the camera and saw a group of relatives standing outside. Uncle Thomas, my dad's older brother, was leading, followed by several aunts. I opened the door and invited them into the living room. My parents and Eric were also there. They came with this group of relatives. Uncle Thomas looked at me with disappointed eyes and asked me in a heavy voice, Brian, I heard you kicked your parents out of the house and let your in-laws beat them. I came here to hear you explain. After Uncle Thomas's question, I didn't say anything. I pulled out my phone, opened the screenshot of my mom's comment, and showed it to Uncle Thomas. Then I played the recording of the confrontation at my parents' house that day, when I went to ask Mom why she called my child a mistake, and they kicked me out. After I hit play on the recording, my mom's voice came from the audio. Your son shouldn't have been born. You married a country girl, gave birth to a child with inferior blood. He's a mistake. Hearing that, all the relatives turned to look at my mom with shocked eyes. I also showed them the full video from the security camera, not edited like Eric's version. The footage clearly showed my parents coming to cause trouble, trying to force their way into the house despite my repeated requests for them to leave. When everything was finished, the relatives' faces had changed entirely. They turned to look at my parents and Eric with disbelieving eyes. Uncle Thomas was the first to react. He stood up, took the glass of water he was drinking, and threw it straight in my dad's face. His voice shook with anger as he asked my dad, What kind of person are you? You let your wife call your grandson a mistake, and you stayed silent? You still have the nerve to come here and play victim? Right then, my mom tried to speak up in defense, but was immediately cut off by an aunt. The aunt screamed in my mom's face. "Shut up. I don't want to hear another word from your mouth." Knowing they couldn't win with the evidence I had, they left in shame, heads down, not daring to look at anyone. The relatives who stayed came to me one by one and apologized for having doubted me. After my parents left, Anna carried Alex from the bedroom to the living room. The little guy had just woken up from his nap, his eyes looking around curiously. When they saw Alex, the relatives seemed to forget everything that had just happened. They competed to get close, wanting to hold Alex. Uncle Thomas held Alex in his arms and looked at me. He said to me in a voice full of emotion, "This boy's so beautiful. He's a blessing, not a mistake. Don't ever let anyone say otherwise." I nodded to Uncle Thomas, my heart full of gratitude. At least there were still people in the family who knew right from wrong. 2 months later, when my parents still refused to leave the house, the civil court case opened. David represented me. He presented clearly and coherently to the judge about my inheritance rights to the house, as well as the $20,000 our debt my parents hadn't paid back. My parents didn't have a lawyer. They defended themselves with emotional arguments. My mom even cried in court, begging the judge to have mercy on 2 older adults. But the law doesn't operate based on emotions. The judge reviewed all the evidence and made the ruling. My parents had 15 days to leave the house. The $20,000 debt was also confirmed. They had to pay me back within 6 months. After the hearing, I filed for a restraining order. I presented to the judge about the times my parents came to my house, causing trouble, about the constant threats and harassment. The judge reviewed the evidence and agreed to grant a restraining order until Alex turns 18 years old. When I walked out of the courthouse, I felt like I'd just lifted a 1,000-pound burden off my shoulders. Finally, I could legally protect my little family. 15 days after the court ruling, my parents were forced to leave the house. The police arrived and required them to pack their personal belongings and leave the premises. That day, I wasn't there. I didn't want to witness that moment. Even though they'd hurt me deeply, watching them get kicked out of the place they'd lived their whole lives still wasn't what I wanted. But that was the consequence of what they'd done, and they had to take responsibility. 3 years have passed since that court hearing. A few months ago, I got news from a relative about Eric. He got divorced. The story was more shocking than I thought. Turns out, Grayson, the son Eric was always proud of, wasn't his biological child. Emily, Eric's wife, had cheated with another man before marriage, and Grayson was the result of that relationship. When the truth was exposed, Eric completely fell apart. But since he married Emily for money, for his position at his wife's company, he had no choice but to accept the divorce quietly. The divorce agreement was signed. Eric didn't get any assets, had to leave his wife's company, and lost visitation rights to Grayson. I wasn't happy hearing that news. Karma might be fair, but witnessing the collapse of a family member, even one who mistreated you, still isn't pleasant. A few weeks later, one afternoon when I was playing with Alex in the backyard, the doorbell rang. Anna went to open the door, then came back with a tense expression. She told me in a low voice, "Your parents are at the door." Hearing Anna's announcement, I walked to the door and saw my parents standing outside. My mom looked at me with pleading eyes and spoke in a trembling voice. "Brian, I just want to see my grandson's face. Just once. I'm begging you." Hearing their plea, I stood looking at the 2 people who gave birth to me. In that moment, memories flooded back. The sarcastic comments about Anna. The comment called my son a mistake. All the ignoring and looking down on us. The threats and cursing. After a few seconds, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 without hesitation. My mom saw this and her face went pale. She screamed at me, "Brian, what are you doing? I want to see my grandson." Ignoring mom's pleading, I answered calmly, "You're violating the restraining order. I have the right to call the police." My dad tried to rush in, but I'd already closed the door. He banged on the door and screamed, "You're ungrateful. You're a demon. Heaven will punish you." I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, the police car arrived. They confirmed my parents were violating the restraining order and required them to leave immediately. If they violated it again, they'd be arrested. I stood by the window, watching the police put my parents in the car and drive away. My mom was still looking back toward my house, her face wet with tears. Anna came beside me, took my hand, and squeezed it tight. She didn't say anything, just stood there next to me. Alex ran over, hugged my leg, and looked up with clear eyes. The little guy asked me, "Dad, are you sad?" I bent down to pick up my son and kissed his forehead. I answered my child in a gentle voice. "No, Dad's not sad. Dad has you and your mom. Dad's thrilled." Alex smiled widely and hugged me tightly around the neck. In my son's realization, I'd made the right decision. Through this story, I have 3 pieces of advice for you. First advice. A real family isn't just people who share your blood, but also people who love and respect you unconditionally. Never let the title family become an excuse for someone to hurt you. Second advice. Always keep evidence. Record audio, take screenshots, save documents. When conflicts arise, emotions can become distorted, but evidence can't. That's the only thing that protects you from false accusations. Third piece of advice. Protecting your children is a sacred duty of parenthood. If someone calls your child a mistake, no matter who they are, they don't deserve to be in your child's life. Don't be afraid to cut off toxic relationships, no matter how painful. That's the end of my story. Before finishing this story, I want to ask you, if you were in my situation, what would you do? Would you act like me? Or would you be stronger and give them a lesson they deserve? Or would you choose to stay silent and endure? Leave your thoughts in the comments below this story. I really want to hear everyone's opinions. Thank you for listening to my story. If you found this story helpful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share to support us. See you again in the following stories. At the Christmas party, after a speech praising the family's achievements, my mom set down her wine glass, her eyes scanning the kids in the room. Then she pointed at them and declared with a bold voice, "I'm proud of all my grandchildren." After that statement, she paused for a beat. Then her eyes stopped on Violet, cold as a knife's edge. She continued with a disdainful tone, "Except one." In that moment, I knew this was a plan to humiliate my daughter. And in that moment, I knew the relationship between my family and me could never be repaired. Before I get into the details of this story, thank you for choosing to listen to us today. I wish you a peaceful day. And don't forget to give me a like if you want to wish me good things too. Hello everyone, I'm Calvin, a 37-year-old financial director in Madison, Wisconsin. The story I'm telling today happened 3 years ago, during Christmas 2022. To help everyone understand what happened, I would like to share with you my mom's Christmas party invitation and what had been going on in my family before that. A week before Christmas, around 10 a.m., I was sitting at work in the office when my phone buzzed. Seeing Mom's name pop up, I hesitated for a few seconds before picking up. As soon as I answered, my mom spoke in an unusually gentle voice. "Calvin, can you bring Harper and Violet home for the Christmas party this year?" I was stunned by my mom's suggestion. For 8 years, she treated my wife and daughter like they didn't exist. Not one phone call to check in. Not a single birthday gift was sent to her grandchild. And now she was actively inviting us home. Without thinking, I declined straight up. I told Mom, "I'm not coming." The other end of the line went silent. I heard Mom's breathing, heavy and tired in a way I'd never heard before. Then she lowered her voice, almost to a whisper. "I'm getting old. I want the family to be together during the important holidays of the year." After a moment of silence, I replied, "I'll think about it." I hung up and put the phone down on my desk. At that moment, my instinct told me something wasn't right. Someone like my mom never humbled herself unless she had no other choice. But I brushed that thought away, telling myself maybe she really wanted to change. That was my first mistake. That evening, after dinner, our little family sat together in the living room. Harper was reading a book on the sofa, while Violet was lying on the floor drawing. Looking at that peaceful scene, I hesitated for a while before deciding to tell my wife about Mom's call. After listening, Harper put her book down and thought silently to herself. After a moment, my wife took my hand and advised me, "I think you should go. After all, that's your family." Harper was always like that. No matter how my family treated her, she never stopped me from staying in touch with them. She understood that I needed it, even though she was the one who had been hurt the most. Just then, Violet overheard our conversation. My daughter looked up, her round eyes curious as she asked me, "Dad, who are Grandpa and Grandma? How come I've never met Grandpa and Grandma?" That question hurt me. My daughter was 7 years old and had never once met her paternal grandparents. Violet didn't understand why, and I didn't know how to explain adult problems to a child. Right after that, Violet put down her crayons, ran over to tug at my hand, and pleaded, "Dad, let me go meet Grandpa and Grandma. I want to know what they're like." Looking into Violet's eager eyes, I couldn't bring myself to refuse. I turned to look at Harper. My wife just smiled gently, saying nothing, her eyes letting me know she'd support whatever decision I made. I patted my daughter's head and said to Violet, "I'll think about it more. Okay?" Hearing me say that, Violet nodded and went back to her drawing. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. I kept thinking about Mom's invitation, about Violet's eager eyes, about Harper's gentleness. But I still couldn't make a definitive decision. I had no idea that any hesitation would harm my wife and daughter. If I could go back to that moment, I would have refused right from the second I picked up the phone. That night, after Harper and Violet had fallen asleep, I still lay tossing and turning in bed. Mom's phone call kept echoing in my head, dragging along memories I'd tried to bury for years. I was born into a well-off family in Janesville, and everything my parents had was thanks to my grandpa. My grandpa founded the wooden furniture manufacturing company in 1980. He was a self-made man who started with nothing and built up something respectable. I still remember those afternoons sitting in the workshop listening to him tell stories about the early days of starting the business, about the failures and getting back up. He always told me something I still remember. A man's worth is in what he builds with his own hands, not what he inherits. But unfortunately, he passed away from a heart attack in 2000, when I was only 12. The day he died, I lost the only person in my family who truly understood me. After he passed, my parents took over the company, and everything started to change. Mom and Dad brought relatives into work, from their siblings to their children. First, I thought it was normal, but as I got older, I realized it wasn't support. It was a system of brown-nosing. Those relatives didn't possess fundamental skills. They just knew how to say what my parents wanted to hear, and in return, they got paid handsomely for jobs they barely did. My parents had 2 sons. Besides me, there was my older brother, Javier, who was 4 years my senior. Javier was always the golden child in their eyes. He never talked back, never questioned anything. Whatever major his parents told him to study, he studied. Wherever they told him to work, he worked there. Whoever they told him to marry, he married that person. Javier was the perfect model of a good son in their eyes. I was the opposite. From a young age, I had different thoughts. I wanted to decide my own life, didn't want to follow the path others laid out for me. At 18, when I was getting ready for college, my parents wanted me to study business administration so I could later run the family company with Javier. But I refused. I chose to study finance because I wanted to build my own path. I still clearly remember that evening when I told my parents about my decision. Dad slammed the table and yelled in my face, "What are you studying finance for? This company is your future. Why don't you get it?" Right then, I looked straight into Dad's eyes and answered, "I don't want my future decided by other people. I want to build my own career." After hearing that, Mom shook her head and said with a disappointed tone, "You won't amount to anything. You'll have to come back begging us." But I didn't come back. After graduating from college, I went job hunting on my own, paid my own rent, and took care of myself penny by penny. Sometimes I had to live on bread, and my bank account was nearly depleted. But I didn't ask my parents for a single dollar. And from then on, I became a thorn in their side. Every family gathering, my parents always bragged about Javier, about his management position at the company, about the big house he'd just bought, about the luxury car he'd just traded in. As for me, they mentioned me as an example of stubbornness and stupidity. The relationship between my family and me became more strained after I met and fell in love with Harper, who is now my wife. I still remember in March 2013, I decided to bring Harper home to meet my family. At that time, we'd been dating for almost a year, and I knew she was the person I wanted to spend my life with. When I introduced Harper to my parents, I told them she owned a small restaurant in Madison. At first, Mom and Dad seemed pretty pleased. Harper was beautiful, spoke politely, and seemed like someone who knew business. That meeting went smoothly, and I thought everything would be fine. From that day on, the relationship between my parents and me improved somewhat. But 2 months later, everything collapsed. One afternoon, Mom, Dad, and Javier suddenly showed up at Harper's restaurant without warning. And they saw her wearing an apron, carrying trays, serving customers. They took pictures and called me immediately. Dad's voice was cold as ice as he growled each word through the phone. "Break up with that girl right now. She's just a waitress. She lied to this whole family." After hearing that, I tried to stay calm and explain to Dad. "You misunderstood. Today an employee got sick, so Harper had to help out. She really is the restaurant owner." But Dad wouldn't listen. He cut me off and yelled, "A restaurant owner serving tables? You think we're stupid? She lied to you, and you're still covering for her." Right after that, Mom grabbed the phone and said with a contemptuous tone, "Let me tell you something. A girl who lies from the start will lie even more later on. You want to marry a waitress?" I tried to explain one more time, but they didn't give me a chance. To them, Harper was a fraud, and I was the fool who got fooled. That evening, I met Harper and told her everything. She sat silently, her eyes red, but she didn't cry. After a while, Harper looked at me and asked with a trembling voice, "So what are you going to do?" I held her hand tight and said, "I won't break up with you. I believe you." That was a decision I never regretted. But from that moment, I knew the relationship between my family and me would never be the same again. In 2014, I proposed to Harper and she said yes. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. But right after I announced this news to my family, everything got worse. When I called to announce our engagement, Dad was silent for a moment, then hung up without saying a word. A few hours later, I got a text from Mom. She wrote briefly and coldly, "If you marry that waitress, don't ever expect to get anything from this family." I read that text over and over again countless times. Part of me still hoped they would change, would realize Harper was a good person, but they never gave her a chance. Our wedding took place that fall. No Mom and Dad, no Javier, no one from my family's side, just close friends and Harper's family. My in-laws were simple farmers from the suburbs. They weren't wealthy, but they treated me like their own son from the moment we met. In 2015, Violet was born. I called to tell Mom and Dad, hoping the arrival of their grandchild would soften their hearts. But Mom only replied with an indifferent tone. "Yeah, I know. Not one congratulations. Not one gift. Not one visit." Meanwhile, Javier married Meredith, the daughter of a wealthy family in the area. His wedding was held lavishly, with the entire extended family in attendance. Mom and Dad proudly bragged to everyone about their wealthy daughter-in-law. I got an invitation, but the card only had my name on it, not Harper's. I didn't attend that wedding. The contrast between how my family treated me and how Javier was treated became increasingly apparent. He was their pride, I was their shame. His wife was warmly welcomed, but my wife was treated like she didn't exist. My parents loved his kids. My child hadn't even met them once. For that reason, after the wedding and when Violet was born, I never brought my wife and daughter to family gatherings. I didn't want them to endure the coldness and contempt from people who were supposed to be my family. Until Mom called to invite us to the Christmas party in 2022. The next morning, I woke up to find Violet already sitting and waiting at the dining table. As soon as she saw me come out of my room, she ran over and immediately asked with hopeful eyes, "Dad, are you done thinking? Can I go meet Grandpa and Grandma?" Looking at my daughter's eager eyes, I couldn't bring myself to refuse. Since her birth, my daughter had never met her paternal grandparents. Violet only knew about them through the few scattered stories I told. After a few seconds of hesitation, I patted Violet's head and said to her, "Okay, we'll go." Violet squealed with joy and ran off to find Harper to share the news. I stood there watching her go, feeling both happy and worried. I'm glad to see my daughter excited, but I'm afraid because I didn't know what was waiting for my little family at that house. In the following days, Violet excitedly prepared gifts for her grandparents. She spent hours each day drawing a family picture that included me, Harper, and the grandparents she'd never met. At the bottom of the drawing, Violet scribbled, I love Grandpa and Grandma. Every time I oversaw her coloring each stroke, my heart sank. I was afraid of my parents' reaction when they received this gift. I was worried they would hurt my daughter. Harper also prepared a small gift for my parents. When I asked my wife if she was sure she wanted to go, Harper smiled and told me, "I know they might not accept me, but I want to go for you and for Violet." On Christmas afternoon, our whole family got in the car from Madison to Janesville. The drive was only about an hour long, but to me it felt like a lifetime. The entire way, Violet kept asking all sorts of questions. She asked me, "Dad, are Grandpa and Grandma nice? Will Grandpa and Grandma like me?" I tried to keep my voice calm as I replied, "I'm sure Grandpa and Grandma will like you." Honestly, I wasn't sure at all. I glanced over at Harper. My wife was looking out the window. Her face was calm, but I knew she was worried too. We looked at each other briefly, said nothing, but we both understood. We were walking into a place where we weren't welcome. When we arrived, my parents' house was already crowded with relatives. Cars filled the entire driveway, laughter and conversation echoing from inside. As soon as the car stopped, Violet got out first, clutching her self-drawn picture tightly. She excitedly looked at the house, then turned to ask me, "Dad, is this Grandpa and Grandma's house? It's so big." I nodded, took my daughter's hand, and walked in with Harper. Dad was standing at the door. When he saw us, he just nodded a casual hello and then turned away to talk with some other relatives. No hug, no asking how we were, like we were just strangers passing by. Mom was standing in the living room. When she saw Harper, she looked my wife up and down with contemptuous eyes. Then she turned away without saying a word. Right then, Javier and Meredith walked in behind us, and Mom's attitude completely changed. She stepped forward to hug Meredith warmly, then turned to their two kids, hugging and kissing each one affectionately. She stroked their hair, praised them, and asked them all sorts of questions. I stood there watching that scene, feeling like someone was squeezing my chest. Violet saw it too. She let go of my hand, ran over to Mom with her picture, and called out loudly, "Grandma, I'm Violet. I have a gift for you." Hearing the call, Mom turned to look at Violet. She picked up the picture, glanced at it, then set it down on the nearby table. "No thank you." No smile. Seeing that, I stepped forward and said to Mom, "Mom, Violet spent all week drawing that picture." Hearing my reminder, Mom turned to look at me with cold eyes. Then she looked down at Violet and said in a chilly tone, "Thank you, Violet. I'll keep it safe." After that, she turned her back and went to talk with some relatives, leaving me with Harper and Violet standing there. Violet looked up at me, her eyes full of confusion. She asked me in a tiny voice, "Dad, doesn't Grandma like my picture?" I bent down to hug my daughter, trying to keep my voice normal as I replied, "No, sweetie. Grandma's just busy right now." Harper put her hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently as a way to comfort me. I knew she was also trying to hold back her emotions. After giving the gift to Mom, we found a corner to sit down. But we hadn't been there long when I heard whispers from the relatives nearby. A man among them looked toward Harper, then asked loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Is this Calvin's wife? I heard she works as a waitress, right?" Snickering laughter rang out from the people around. As for me, hearing that comment, my blood boiled. I shot up, walked straight to that man, and asked right to his face, "You want all your teeth knocked out?" The man went pale and took a step back. The whole room went silent and stared at me. When the atmosphere was tense, Javier appeared beside me. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Calvin, calm down. It's a happy day, don't make a big deal out of it." But his eyes and smile were full of mockery. That look made me uneasy, as if he was enjoying a play where he already knew the ending. I looked around the room. Mom's attitude during the phone call the other day and today was completely different. That day, she actively invited my wife and daughter home, but now she was treating them like unwelcome intruders. Part of me wanted to take my wife and daughter's hands and leave immediately, but the other part wanted to stay and see what game they were playing. After dinner, following the tradition of every Christmas, Mom stood up to give a speech. She held her wine glass, standing at the head of the table, her eyes sweeping over each person in the room. Mom started with a formal tone. "Another year has passed. Our family remains united, remains successful. I'm very proud of what we've accomplished this past year. As soon as Mom finished speaking, applause from the brown-nosers rang out. After almost 20 seconds, Mom raised her hand to signal everyone to stop. Then she spoke about the company, highlighting its achievements from the past year. While talking about the accomplishments, she turned to look at Javier, her eyes full of pride, and said, "Javier, my son, has brought in major contracts for the company. I'm proud of you." Javier nodded, a satisfied smile on his lips. After praising Javier, Mom continued talking about Meredith and Javier's 2 children, praising them for being bright students and well-behaved, worthy of being her grandchildren. I sat silently, knowing my part wouldn't be mentioned. I was used to that, but I didn't expect what happened next. Mom set down her wine glass, her eyes scanning the kids in the room. Then she pointed at them and declared with a bold voice, "I'm proud of all my grandchildren." She paused for a beat. Then her eyes stopped on Violet, cold as a knife's edge. She continued with a contemptuous tone, "Except one." Hearing that, my heart seemed to stop beating. The whole room was silent for a few seconds. Then snickering laughter rang out from somewhere. Scattered applause. Eyes all turned toward Violet. My daughter sat there, eyes wide open in confusion. Violet turned to look at me, her voice trembling as she asked me, "Dad, is Grandma talking about me? What did I do wrong?" Hearing that question, my chest felt like someone was pressing down on it. My 7-year-old daughter didn't understand why Grandma would say that. She didn't understand why the whole room was laughing. At this point, Harper hugged Violet tightly, her eyes red, tears about to spill. She bent down and whispered in Violet's ear, "It's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." As for me, I couldn't take it anymore. I shot up, hands clenched. I looked straight at Mom's face and asked directly, "What did you just say?" Mom looked back at me, not backing down one bit. She replied in a cold tone, "I said the truth. That girl is not my grandchild." Hearing Mom's words, anger erupted in me. I stepped toward Mom and growled each word. "Violet is my daughter. She's your granddaughter. You have no right to talk about my daughter like that." Mom smiled coldly, then said to me, "Granddaughter? She's the child of a waitress. You think I'm going to accept her as my granddaughter?" The moment I heard Mom refuse to acknowledge Violet as her granddaughter, Violet burst into sobs. She buried her face in Harper's chest, her shoulders shaking with each sob. My daughter's crying tore my heart apart. I turned to look at Mom. I remembered Mom's attitude a week ago when she called me and invited us to the Christmas party. Her tone was then completely different from what it is now. Mom's sudden change in attitude confused me. I decided to ask directly, "So why did you invite us to the party? What's this whole game of yours?" Before Mom could answer, Javier stood up, a mocking smile on his lips. He looked at me, then said with the voice of a victor, "Inviting you back was my idea. I wanted you to see how wrong you were when you went against Mom and Dad, against the family." Hearing that answer, I understood everything. It was all just a trap. They invited me back to humiliate my wife and daughter in front of the whole extended family. Those professional brown-nosers. I looked at Javier, my voice cold as ice when I asked back, "You set this up?" Javier shrugged, then replied to me, "I just wanted you to wake up. You abandoned your family, abandoned the company, and married a waitress. You think you were right? Look where you are and where I am." Right after that, a relative sitting nearby spoke up with a supportive tone. "Javier's right. Calvin, you should be grateful that Mom and Dad gave you a chance to come back. Don't talk back." Then another voice rang out from the corner of the room, mocking and harsh. "Just go home. You don't belong here." Right then, Violet cried louder. She clung to Harper's shirt. Her voice choked as she asked her mother, "Mommy, why do they hate me? Did I do something wrong?" Hearing that question, Harper also burst into tears. She hugged her daughter, unable to say a word. I stood there, watching my wife and daughter crying, watching the whole crowd laughing mockingly, watching my parents and brother looking at me with contemptuous eyes. That's when I understood something. These people weren't my family. They never considered me family. After everything that happened, Dad finally spoke up, his voice cold and final. "Calvin, if you want to stay, then sit down and be quiet. If not, then take your wife and daughter and get out of here." After that statement, I looked at Dad, then at Mom, then at Javier. None of them showed any regret. None of them thought they were wrong. I turned back to Harper and Violet. My daughter was still crying, her red eyes looking at me full of fear and hurt. The picture she'd spent all week drawing was still lying on the table, pushed aside by someone, crumpled. Seeing that picture, a pain tore through my heart. My daughter had been so excited when she drew that picture. She'd written "I love Grandpa and Grandma" with all the feelings of a 7-year-old child. And this was how Grandma responded to her love. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. After witnessing their performance, my hands clenched tight. I wanted to charge forward and punch each one of them in the face. I wanted to show them what it felt like to be humiliated. But right then, I looked over at Violet. My daughter was sobbing in Harper's arms, her red eyes looking at me full of fear, and I remembered the promise I made to my wife. We'd promised each other we would never raise our voices, never be violent in front of our daughter. I took a deep breath, trying to contain the rage boiling inside me. Then I looked over at Harper and nodded to signal her. Harper understood me immediately. She quickly took Violet's hand and led her toward the door, leaving me alone to face the entire room. I didn't hit them. Hitting them would only dirty my hands. Instead, I walked slowly to the table where Violet's picture was lying. Someone had pushed aside the picture, crumpled at the corner. I picked up the picture and looked at it for a moment. My daughter's scribbled drawings. Pictures of Dad, Mom, Violet, and even the grandparents she'd never met. The whole room silently watched me. A few seconds later, I walked over to where my parents were standing. Then I pulled a lighter out of my pocket. Mom frowned at me, her voice warning, "What are you planning to do?" I didn't answer. I flicked the lighter and brought the flame to the corner of the picture. The fire started licking the paper, spreading gradually from one corner to another. I stood there watching the picture burn, watching my daughter's drawings turn to ash. When the picture was almost completely burned, I dropped it to the floor and stomped out the flames. Then I looked up, stared straight into my parents' eyes, and said, "You two don't deserve to receive this picture. Neither of you deserves to be my daughter's grandparents. From now on, we're done." The entire room went dead silent. No one said a word. Witnessing my action, Dad yelled in my face, "Get out of my house, you ungrateful brat." I didn't respond. I just looked at him one last time, then turned my back and walked toward the door. Behind me, the whispers of the relatives rose, mocking laughter, criticism. But I didn't turn back. I just kept walking, walked past the door, walked out of the house I used to call home. In that moment, I knew I would never come back to this place again. As I approached the car, I saw Harper and Violet standing beside it. My daughter was still crying. As soon as she saw me, Violet ran over and hugged me tight. She looked at me, her red eyes full of tears, choking as she asked me, "Dad, why doesn't Grandma like me? What did I do wrong?" Hearing that question, my chest felt like someone was squeezing it. I hugged my daughter tight and said to her, "You didn't do anything wrong. You're the most wonderful thing Mom and Dad have." Right then, Harper also burst into tears. My wife stood beside us, tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked at me with eyes full of anguish and said, "Calvin, I'm sorry. It's all because of me. If I had explained more clearly that day, if I hadn't let them misunderstand, then you and Violet wouldn't have been insulted by them." Hearing my wife's words, I took her hand and shook my head, saying to her, "You're not at fault at all. The fault is with people who don't know how to appreciate." Harper looked at me, nodded, and squeezed my hand tight. Right after that, I got my wife and daughter in the car. The whole drive back to Madison, no one said anything. I focused on driving, but my mind kept drifting back to what had just happened. About Mom's contemptuous eyes, about Javier's victorious smile, about the relatives' laughter, and about my daughter's question, "What did I do wrong?" That night, after we got home, I didn't let Violet sleep alone. All three of us lay together on the big bed. Violet lay in the middle, one arm hugging me, one arm hugging Harper. I lay there, looking up at the ceiling in the darkness. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would protect my wife and daughter at any cost. I would never let them endure that kind of humiliation again. Never. 3 years after that Christmas night, I completely cut off contact with my family. To me, they no longer existed. I poured all my energy into work and my little family. Harper's restaurant flourished, opening 2 more branches and becoming a well-known restaurant chain in Madison. I was promoted to senior financial director. We bought a new, more spacious house in a quiet suburb. As for Violet, she grew up happy. Good grades. Loved by her friends, now 10 years old. She never mentioned that Christmas night again. I don't know if she forgot or just hid it, but I didn't ask. Some wounds are best left alone. Occasionally, I heard news about my family through acquaintances. My parents' company was struggling due to poor management. Javier fell into gambling and mounting debt. My parents were gradually getting weaker. The relatives who used to brown nose had all turned their backs on them. I heard this news and felt nothing. Not happy, not sad, not satisfied. Just empty. Until one weekend afternoon a month ago. That day, I was sitting in the living room reading a book when the doorbell rang. I got up and walked to open the door, and I froze. Mom was standing there. She'd aged a lot compared to 3 years ago. Grayer hair, deeper sunken eyes. As soon as she saw me, Mom spoke with a trembling voice. "I need to talk to you." I stood blocking the door and didn't invite her in. I looked at her and asked, "What do you want?" Mom swallowed hard, then started telling me. The company was on the verge of bankruptcy due to Javier's poor management. He was drowning in debt from gambling. Dad had been in a car accident and was now bedridden. The relatives who used to swarm around brown-nosing had all disappeared. Javier and Meredith had divorced. Mom looked at me with pleading eyes and said, "You're the only one who can save this family. Please, come back and help us." I stood there listening. Then I smiled coldly. 3 years ago, she called my daughter unworthy of being her granddaughter. 3 years ago, she stood watching the whole extended family humiliate my wife and daughter. 3 years ago, she kicked me out of the house. Now she came here asking me to save the family. Without needing to think too much, I looked straight into Mom's eyes and said to her, "Go away. Deal with the consequences yourself." Mom was stunned. Then she asked me with a trembling voice, "Can I see Violet?" Hearing that, anger erupted in me. I looked at her and replied in a cold tone, "Get lost. Don't ever show up at my house again." Then I slammed the door in her face. That evening, when Violet was asleep, I told Harper everything. My wife listened and was silent for a while. Then she looked at me and said, "Calvin, I know they hurt us a lot, but after all, they're your parents. If you want to help them, I'll support you." I looked at my wife. The woman my family had despised and humiliated was now a waitress. Now she was willing to forgive them, but I wasn't. I shook my head and said to my wife, "No, they caused it, they deal with it. I don't owe them anything." Harper didn't say anything more. She just took my hand and squeezed gently. In that moment, I knew I was right. Through this story, I have 3 pieces of advice for you. First advice: forgiveness is a choice, not an obligation. No one has the right to force you to forgive people who deliberately hurt you and your loved ones. Second advice: don't let the word family tie you to toxic relationships. A real family is one where people love and respect you, not those who only know how to humiliate and look down on you. Final advice: you have the right to protect your boundaries. Refusing to help people who have hurt you doesn't mean you're a bad person. It simply means you're being mindful of your own well-being. That's how you protect yourself and your little family. My story ends here. Before saying goodbye, I have one question for you. If I were you, what would I do when my mom came back asking for help after 3 years? Leave your thoughts in the comments below this story. Don't forget to subscribe to support us. Thank you for listening to my story.